Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is accessible and relatable astrology that teaches you how to support your emotional well-being using the wisdom of the zodiac. I'm your host, Natha Perkins. Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's another week on Natha. We are talking about the Scorpio shadow this week, and this is everybody's favorite episode when we dive into the shadow aspects of each of these archetypes. If you've missed the previous shadow episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to them because I teach astrology from the standpoint that we all have every single one of these signs in our charts. We reenact their energies all day long. They show up uniquely for each of us, but they are there. So you would be remiss if you were only looking at your sun sign, or even if you were only listening to this podcast because you are an astrology fan. Season 5 is where we go into the psychology, the spirituality, and the astrology of every single sign. So welcome. And I'm going to do something new at the end of this episode. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. So we're going to talk today about fear. That's the foundation of the Scorpio shadow. If you are listening and you find your nervous system activated, or you find that you're making connections that you would like help with, feel free to book a private reading with me at electraastrology.com. I also have apprenticeships and mentorships, whether you're wanting to learn astrology for your own use, or you're a therapist, a psychotherapist, a healer, a guide, and you don't know astrology very well, but you know that you could use elements of it to understand your clientele better. There's a lot of different ways to work with me. So again, electraastrology.com. And I so appreciate all of the ways that you guys are interacting with these, whether you are on the podcast and you're subscribing, leaving a review, if you're watching me on YouTube and you're subscribing, commenting, etc. I do appreciate it. It helps get this info out to more people. So deep breath. We're going to talk about fear. Here's the thing about fear as it relates to Scorpio. Scorpio is one of the first signs where we have to really face the things that have happened to us throughout the course of our lives. We come into the world in Aries form, where we open our mouths, we scream, we demand, and hopefully our needs are met. And we begin to understand that we are misperceived, ignored, hurt. And when we look at the archetype of Scorpio, we say, this is my pain and this is my suffering. This is representative of everything that has happened to me in my past that has been really painful. And I don't want it to happen again. I am fearful that it's going to happen again. And so I'm going to defend. So we're looking at the fear and then the defense against that fear. The defense against the fear can take many forms. And we have to understand that when we're looking at the idea of trauma and traumatic things that have happened to us in the past, it can be really awful trauma to our physical, emotional well-being. But it can also be times where it just felt stressed. Maybe you were with parents that were going through a divorce. Maybe you had a parent or parents that had addictions. They weren't coping with their own stress well. You were probably the victim of somebody's emotional reactivity, getting yelled at. And if you were a sensitive person, which you probably are if you're listening to this podcast, if you were sensitive, you were feeling into the energy. So you didn't know what was happening. And chances are you didn't have capable adults who were explaining to you what was happening. So you had to make sense of this discomfort, this angst that you felt in your body all on your own. And you probably also didn't have any adults that were soothing, saying, it's going to be okay. This feels scary. This crazy thing is happening and it's going to be okay. Because most of us were raised by parents who were dealing with their own stuff and they were emotionally limited. And we were not given explanation for why things were the way that they were, whether it was really terrible trauma all the way to just feeling other people's energy. With Scorpio, we feel the repressed emotions that other people don't want to feel for themselves. So anger, jealousy, shame, spite, resentment, we feel that. And as sensitive little beings, if we're surrounded in our young life by people who are feeling those emotions and unable to deal with them, can't talk about them, can't process them, we take them on as our own. And it starts to create this baseline of fear and this distrust of the world. Of course it does. And then as we grow into our own right as adults, we have to face it. And that's when we get to the eighth house, to Scorpio, to the planet Pluto. And ideally, we get to a place where we say, ouch, this hurts. I'm suffering. I have a lot of fear in my system. I don't know how to deal with it. And we seek out things like psychotherapy or healing or spiritually awakening. We are doing that interpersonal work that helps to free us from some of the pain because we are seeking to understand the pain. Where did this come from? Why do I always feel so nervous? Why am I always looking over my other shoulder? Why am I always waiting for the shoe to drop? And then, in order to get those answers, we have to start looking at all of the ways that we have sought to cover up that fear. In 12-step programs, they will talk about the fear problem and how we're always seeking to solve the fear problem. So just take a deep breath. And what comes to your mind? What is your fear problem? What are you worrying about? What do you fear is going to happen? What is the other shoe that is going to drop? And if something specific comes to your mind, I'm not surprised because right now we are dealing with so much of this Plutonian energy. So we're all being asked to look closely at our fears. So a lot of us have our premier fears, the fears that are always kind of behind the scenes running the show. We have come to understand what those fears are, especially over the last, let's say, 6 months. Remember that our Scorpio fears are the ones that we don't like to talk about because they feel like they could be embarrassing or humiliating. They could put us in a position of being too vulnerable. And frankly, our Scorpion fears are traumas that we have experienced. We don't need to talk about them because they can be very activating and very triggering. And a lot of times we don't really want to admit to other people that these things have happened, and we don't really want to admit them to ourselves. We don't want to talk about them. We don't want to look at them. We don't want to deal with them because it's too painful. So let's talk about some of the ways that we try to solve this fear problem. The idea of resentment. We talked a lot about resentment in Cancer season because the water signs will hold on to resentment. Water signs are emotional by nature. So think about any situations in your life where you are resentful of something that somebody has said or done to you, and you are holding on to it. And why do we hold on to resentment? Because it is self-protective. When we resent somebody for hurting us, we are less likely to allow them to come and hurt us again. However, resentment keeps us from actually facing the fear. It keeps us from dealing with the pain because we are blaming our issue on somebody else. And so this brings me to blame. Blame is another way that we seek to solve our fear problem. And we see this in emotionally stunted people. And honestly, we are all emotionally stunted in our own ways, not all the time. Even those among us that have done the most personal work still have moments where they slide right off the cliff into some of these aspects. Another way that our Scorpio shadow shows up is when we are fixated on blaming other people for our problems. When we get emotionally reactive, somebody gets emotionally reactive back at us, and then we blame them for being the problem. Somebody has upset us, we say it's them that's the problem. So anytime in your life where you find yourself blaming other people, it's them, it's their problem, they upset me, they made me mad, and therefore I was vindicated in attacking them back because they started it. That is Scorpio shadow. And that's a way that we avoid having to feel our feelings and therefore feel our fear, which brings me into victimhood. Victimhood. Now, nobody likes to be a victim, obviously, and logically. However, being a victim comes with a lot of perks. Not only do we get to blame somebody else, But we also get accolades, holding, and love from those around us. And if you were raised in a family where empathy was lacking, then perhaps pity and empathy is going to feel really good to you. It's going to feel soothing. Even though nobody wants to be a victim, when we are emotionally triggered or we're upset or we've been wronged, then we can become victimized by it. Another way that we actually aren't dealing with what it's really bringing up. We're instead throwing a band-aid on it and calling it, I was hurt. So I also want to clarify that when we're talking about this kind of stuff that brings up the fear, the things that happened to us when we were children, that's in the past. That's history, and we can't go back and change it. And we didn't have tools to meet it any other way than we did. What I'm talking about now is you as an adult, as you sit here with your life experience, your ability to have context, and your tools that you've learned. And yet, even with all of that, we are still dealing with a fear problem, and we are still coping with these fears in all of these ways. These aren't wrong ways to cope with fear. I just want to point it out to you that when you find yourself stewing in resentment, blaming somebody else, feeling like you're a victim, that there's something to be examined here. There's some sort of presumably scorpion, deep emotion that is rising to the surface that wants to be seen. So when we look at the water signs and the emotions, we know some emotions are much easier to feel and deal with than others. Some are really hard. And some of us have never had any training in actually feeling the emotions and sitting with them and allowing them to be in the body. That's part of what we talk about on this podcast. How can you be in your body and be present in the present moment to everything that is happening in the dynamic field of awareness without judging it, without trying to change it, being with discomfort? So we can do that for a minute right now. Just close your eyes if you're in a place to do that. Take some deep breaths and just notice what is happening in your nervous system. How does it feel? Do you notice any contraction, any unsteadiness? Are you aware of where you might hold your fear in your own body? We do tend to hold fear in the same places in our body. And when you have physical ailments that crop up over and over, like headaches or bad digestion or an achy knee or breathlessness, you should be able to trace that pain and suffering back to something that has brought up your anxiety, your fear, etc. So we're using our body as a compass to help us understand how things feel. And frankly, one of the remedies for Scorpio fear is facing that fear head on. And it doesn't mean that if you're scared of going 100 miles an hour in a car, that you hit the gas. It is the facing of the fear by sitting with the fear and allowing it to be there and inspecting it. There's a study in physics. It's called the observer effect. And I'm going to paraphrase, and I'm probably going to make it way more simple than it actually is. But they have found that particles like electrons behave differently when they are observed versus when they are unobserved. And we can look at our own fear and we can presume that something similar might be true. When we can observe what is here, when we can observe a shame response, a fear response, a sense of humiliation or embarrassment, envy, resentment, etc., when we can observe that it is here in our experience currently, it can change it. And that's the whole point of dealing with Scorpio themes. We are transforming. We are understanding the nature of our fear and how it controls us so that we can give it less control and become more empowered. So I also want to talk about addiction because we really can't have this conversation without talking about addiction as a way that we try to solve our fear issue. Addiction can show up in a million ways. We don't have to be on the street with a needle in our arm in order to be considered addicted or using addictive coping mechanisms. Addiction can be anything from flying into a rage when somebody upsets you, always assuming the worst is going to happen, being overly busy, filling up your schedule so that you don't have time to stop and think and feel, buying things as a false high, eating as a way to numb yourself, obviously drugs and alcohol, scrolling, sports, exercise. There's all these ways that we use things to numb us from actually having to feel whatever is coming up for us. So, because of that, know that anytime that you find yourself feeling compulsive, I have to compulsively exercise, otherwise, my inner critic's going to beat me up and tell me that I'm getting fat. I have to compulsively pick up my phone and look at it because the tension that's building in my body, I don't want to face it. So I have to pick up the phone and start numbing. I have to make plans. I have to be running around doing stuff. I have to take my kids to a million sports activities, etc. All of this could potentially be ways that you are numbing yourself from dealing with the fear. And the reason that I'm even talking about all of this is to bring your awareness to it, because this really is the sign where we get the ability to go in and shift in a really big way. Because think about how much fear runs everything. Why do you think that they use fear to market to us all the time? Fear of getting old, fear of getting fat, fear of getting sick, fear of running out of money. But why do you think that the media, the marketers, the authority is always trying to get us to be in a state of fear? Because we become less powerful. And so this fear that you hold in your own body, in your own system from the things that happened to you as a child, and maybe even from your past lives that you don't remember, that fear creates a sense of powerlessness within you. And as we are going through this transformation on the planet right now, as you've heard me and many other practitioners say, there are two choices. We can choose the choice of fear or the choice of love. And this is not as easy as we might think, because the fear can be very much an autopilot response. But once you are able to dissect, why am I doing this? Why do I have resentment? Oh, I'm fearful about something. Why am I zoning out? Why am I in my little addiction? Oh, I have a fear about something. Why am I assuming the worst? Why am I always expecting the other shoe to drop? Oh, I'm fearful about something. So the more that we can get in there and acknowledge that there's some sort of underlying fear, and we can pull it out and we can look at it, usually it will take us back into something that happened as a child where we don't want that thing to happen again. And so we have built up all of these defenses against it. And of course, we want to keep ourselves safe. And that is, in fact, one of the gifts of Scorpio, is that it can keep us safe. Being defended, watching our environment, being discerning, being aware is a wonderful defense system. However, we don't want to be so defended that our fear is actually running the show. We want to be discerning, we want to be watchful, and we want to act with precision so that more bad things don't happen to us. But we also want to do that in a really powerful way so that it's not the fear that's running the show. Pay attention this week, especially after you've listened to this episode. Notice how often fear tries to come in and overtake you. There are also many theories that lower vibrational beings feed off of fear. And so imagine that if you're walking around in a state of fearfulness, intoxicated on your defense mechanisms, and I mean intoxicated in that you're not thinking clearly, you don't have all of your faculties on board, and you are becoming an attraction to lower, heavier vibrational energies. We don't want that. No thanks. So this is where you get to choose love and self-love. And it is very self-loving to acknowledge, I have a deep-seated fear that something bad is going to happen. And so now, as I sit here as a capable, powerful adult with life experience and wisdom, how can I soothe that inner child that is so incredibly fearful? How can I soothe myself? And just reality check and bring in that deep breath, that centering. We're trying to cultivate a sense of steadiness. So, deep breathing, staying with the breath, paying attention to the present moment, feeling your body as an adult, capable body, being out in nature, spending time with your animals, journaling, pulling oracle cards. These are all ways that you can ground back into the reality. And in the reality, you will be able to see that much of your fear just stems from your history and that you actually aren't even a vibrational match at this point anymore to more of those things happening. But again, it does take this constant choosing of love over fear. And when you're choosing love, it's a higher vibration. You are therefore pulling through the law of attraction more higher vibration things to you, which ends up soothing the nervous system and giving less power to that fear. So this is complicated in one way to think about, and it's also very simple in other ways. But know that as we're moving through Scorpio season, acknowledging the fear and how deeply the fear goes into your system can be a really powerful way to soothe the fear and remind yourself that there's actually not as much to fear as we think there is. So, we're going to talk about the Scorpio gifts because this is such a powerful archetype. It is awe inspiring if you really get into what we can transform if we are aware of the need to transform it once we come to Scorpio. So, we're going to talk more about that. We're going to talk about the Scorpio Taurus axis. And before we get there, don't forget, I have something special planned for the end. I am also going to talk about the astrology of the week. So let's do that now. All right, we begin on Monday. I want to point out that Saturn has officially hit 12 degrees. So it is in its stationing period. It won't go direct until November 15th. But Saturn in Pisces is teaching us about the limitations or lack thereof when it comes to our relationship to things that are bigger than us, things that are greater than us. Today, Monday, we also have the moon at 27 of Virgo opposing Neptune at 27 of Pisces, and Mars is at 27 of Cancer. So, what that says to me is that there's a lot of information right now that is coming into our consciousness as it relates to things like other groups that are influencing humans on the planet, whether that be aliens, groups from other star systems. There's also a lot of new information that's coming in about the nature of being a spiritual being and what we're doing on this planet and what's happening on this planet. It's a lot of info. Now, some of it's going to feel messy and like it's just brain clutter. Some of it's going to seem really unbelievable. But any of this information that you feel particularly touched by, or it feels like it resonates, pay attention to it because the veils are becoming thinner and our brains before now haven't been able to conceptualize. We wouldn't have been able to use the information. But now, as things are shifting and changing in our own consciousness, we're able to understand this information on a different level. So whatever is coming in that catches your attention, especially the attention of your heart and of your gut, pay attention. On November 1st, we have a new moon in Scorpio. It's at 9 degrees. While this new moon is happening, we are also building on Mars opposing Pluto at 29 of Cancer and Capricorn. We are also looking at Jupiter in a sextile to Chiron, both at 20 degrees of Gemini and Aries, respectively. Juno is also at 29 degrees. There's a lot going on. New moons are a time to go in and get clarity. And considering that we've been talking about the nature of Scorpio and how very fearful it can be, we are building into the US elections, and there's so much fear being pumped into the field about that and what's going to happen if ... This is a powerful weekend as we move into this Mars squaring Pluto, which can also bring in conflict energy It's squaring Juno, which is our relationships. Be very intentional around who you are going to argue with, who's stepping on your toes, what you're trying to do. The more that you move toward fear, feeding that body of energy, and you really don't want to be a part of that as a light worker. You really want to be working on centering and creating this sense of steadiness in your own system so that you can create a ripple effect. When you are steady, when you are solid, when you are facing your own fear without slipping into any of your coping mechanisms, then people will have no choice but to become more like that when they are around you. And we need more steadiness right now. So, as I promised, I have something new. I created an oracle that goes for every sun sign. And you can look at this as your sun or your rising sign. But considering that we have this really intense energy that is leading us into this really intense event this week, that very likely is not going to be very cut and dried, I thought that it would be helpful to give everybody a little bit of an oracle reading. So if you are an Aries or you're an Aries rising, tread carefully in partnerships, channel any fiery or feisty energy into understanding where your control dynamics or theirs might be blocking true connection. If you are a Taurus or a Taurus rising, emotional tension might stir up in partnerships. Seek your steady ground by clarifying your values and focus on long-term stability, not short-term reactivity. You don't always have to be right. Spoken like a true Taurus. Gemini risings. Mercury's influence here, I forgot to mention that Mercury is also a part of this because Mercury is at 29 degrees as well. So we have all this 29-degree energy, and the 29th degree is that finalizing anaretic degree. It's really intense. It's where we are asked to step into our mastery. So we're looking at Juno relationships, Mars war, Pluto transformation, and Mercury communication. So here, Gemini's Mercury influence sharpens your communication, but be mindful not to let your mind influence or dominate your emotions. Reflect deeply on how you communicate within your relationships. For all of you Cancer and Cancer rising, with Mars in your sign right now, it's easy to feel really defensive. So try not to let your reactivity drive you or hurt feelings to color everything. Instead, focus on nurturing both yourself and your partnerships. Leo, power struggles in your relationships could challenge your sense of authority. Allow transformation to occur without clinging to the past. Let go to gain strength and trust that you're headed in the right direction of self-knowing, which is the correct direction. Virgo and Virgo rising, there is a potential for healing within partnerships through honest communication. Use Mercury's position to express your thoughts clearly, but be open to change. Change might not feel perfect, but trust that it will be by the time it's over. Libra rising. The balance that you seek in relationships may feel elusive right now. Don't shy away from facing the intensity. This isn't the time to stay on the glossy surface. Use this time to reevaluate where power dynamics need adjusting. Scorpio and Scorpio rising. Hidden emotional battles come to the surface, or else they become too obvious to ignore. Use Pluto's transformative energy to dive deep into where partnerships require growth and renewal. Sagittarius and Sag rising. Restlessness in partnerships can challenge your usual optimism. Stay open to seeing things from new angles, especially in terms of emotional and power dynamics. Capricorn rising. Pluto's influence in your sign urges a reevaluation of the power in your relationships. This is not new. It's time to transform how you relate to both authority and vulnerability within your partnerships. Aquarius, partnership dynamics could feel destabilizing. Don't resist the changes. Let them push you into a new understanding of freedom within your commitment. And then finally, Pisces rising. Emotional reactions in relationships may bubble up, but your intuitive nature is going to guide you through. Use this moment to clarify your deeper desire in your partnerships. All right, I'm going to leave you with that. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you all next week. Thanks so much for joining me. If you have enjoyed what you have heard, like, subscribe, leave a message, leave a review. You can find me on Instagram at Electra_astrology or on my website at electraastrology.com.